I am so pleased that you are all here with us today. Thank you so very much. And I would like to introduce Dr. Lauren Beach, who will be introducing our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon. Nice to see everyone here back from lunch. It's a fantastic day. This conference is really a pleasure of my life to attend, and was heavily involved with Bisexual Organizing Project before moving to Nashville, where I'm now at Vanderbilt University. So I feel emotional, so I just have to say. It's really it's an honor for me to introduce my friend today, Dr. Herukhuti. He is an amazing person, accomplished in many walks of life, and is also, I think, as you'll hear him speak today, has a warm and welcoming heart and personality to his essence. Dr. Herukhuti is a faculty member at Goddard College in Vermont. He also is a very active, in addition to being a scholar, and I love it how he describes himself as a revolutionary scholar, is also an artist, an activist, and an advocate in many different communities. He is the founder and the chief erotics officer for the Center for Sexuality and Culture. He's a well-published person, has written multiple books, was one of the editors of Recognized Bisexual Men, an anthology, as well as Conjuring Black Funk, Notes on Culture, Sexuality, and Spirituality, Volume 1. So I think there's a promise there. Dr. Herukhuti also has received multiple awards and has had multiple plays in the New York International Fringe Festival, including My Brother's a Keeper, which I know several people here have had the real privilege to see performed in person. Personally, we've known Dr. Herukhuti since 2013, when we were the co-leads on the HIV-related presentation that took place at the White House that year. We've also worked together on some bisexual policy briefs with many people in this room, as well as Karen Greensmith, another colleague of ours at the Movement Advancement Project. And I really can't wait to hear what Dr. Herukhuti has to share with us all today, and would encourage people to get to know him, look him up. He's got a great number of websites that go into more depth in his background if you're interested. You can also read his work in the Journal of Bisexuality if you're interested more in the theoretical or academic contributions that he's made. And with that, I will turn it over to our first keynote speaker of Because 2016. Thank you.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the waters. Wade in the waters, wade in the waters, children, wade in the waters. God's gonna trouble the waters. Nejrak Sepshuin, Anuktatil Nef Sepshuin, Anuk Sepshuin, Nejrak Sepshuin, Anuktatil Nef Sepshuin, Anuk Sepshuin, Nejrak Sepshuin, Anuktatil Nef Sepshuin, Anuk Sepshuin, and Nejrak Sepshuin, Anuktatil Nef Sepshuin, Anuk Sepshuin, Raditi Chenang, Radiant Chenang, Dua U Sepshuin. Homage to my ancestors. Nejrak and Poop Watsabak and Datilnath and Poop Watsabak. Anuk and Poop Watsabak. Homage to the openers of the way the guardians of the gates. Duau. I want to give thanks to the Dakota people whose land we sit and stand upon today, whose bodies, work, spirit, sweat, and blood nourished this earth and continue to nourish this earth. I want to thank the Bisexual Organizing Project and the Because Conference organization and volunteers and all those who made this conference possible. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. May my words, may my speech bring what is needed. Thank you all for coming. I hope today to talk a little bit about the conference theme, My Identity is My Life. And to do so in a very authentic way, to come from my place in the world. See, I grew up in a family of revolutionaries. My maternal grandparents met in the Communist Party, Black Communist Party. My parents were, at one point, members of the Black Panther Party for self-defense, and later became Sunni Muslim. And so I was raised in a culture, in a cultural context in which I was held definitely for my Africanness. And as well taught how to navigate what I would later come to identify as imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchy. So I come to the conversation about bisexuality through that lens. And I want to hold out to you two ideas for us to mull over. One, I want to challenge this notion of a bisexual community. And two, the notion that sexuality is not a choice. I want to suggest to you that sexuality is a choice. And how we think about that choice and how we bring our own cultural context, our own values, inform the kind of choice we make around that. I want to also say that I come from a Black oratory and religious context. So if something that I say moves you or speaks to you, I'd like for you to give me that energy back. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So if something that I say really moves you, please get up out of your seat. If something I say brings you to exclaim something, please bring that into the room. See, we in academia call that call and response, but in Black community, we call that just being alive and showing up. So help me to be in conversation with you. Is that all right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So I first started having sex when I was in the first grade. Someone said, And that sex was with a best friend of mine who was embodied male, and with the daughter of one of my mother's friends who would stay over after school until her mom came to pick her up. Most of the sex was oral sex, but there was some grinding, there was definitely kissing. And at the age of being whatever you are when you're in the first grade, I knew that it was pleasurable, I knew that it was enjoyable, and beyond that, I kind of knew we shouldn't be doing it. But it wasn't because of the genders involved. It was just a knowing that this was something that was better kept amongst us. So when I hear of the concept of coming out, and I, again, come from a tradition where secrecy doesn't mean that one is ashamed. Secrecy means that one honors the intimacy of the experience, the relationship, the energy that we share. I'm also a Kemetic priest, all right? Kemet being what we call in the West ancient Egypt. And so in that context, we have what's called the inner temple and the outer temple. And that you get from the outer temple into the inner temple through initiations that prepare you for what you're going to experience at the next level. What are called secret societies in the West. In the Kemetic context and in most of the African context, we don't have secret societies in the sense that people know that the society exists. What we have are societies of secrets, that we hold certain knowledge for the community, and that knowledge is there to nourish the entire community, even if everyone doesn't have access to it. It is a choice to claim the calling to that secret knowledge. And we share that with those who have been sufficiently initiated. The idea of coming out related to this what for me was a bath of pleasure that I experienced starting in first grade. The idea that in order for me to honor it, I have to don some clothes of a particular cultural group, this white gay identity cultural group, this identity politics, diminishes the experience that I have every time I enter into relationship with someone else, of that bath of pleasure. So then what does it mean for me to be in quote unquote community with someone who, for them, the sexual identity politics of the LGBT movement is very, very important? How can we be in community with each other across the different worldviews that we have? How can we come to understand and learn and appreciate that when we are using words like sexually fluid or bisexual or polysexual or pansexual or non-monosexual, that we may actually, although using similar or same words mean very, very different things based upon our lived experience, based upon our come from places, based upon our lives. The idea of sexuality as a choice came to be very real for me when I began to study among the Dagara people of Burkina Faso and Ghana, or at least one elder, Dr. Malidoma Somé, who talks about this concept among the Dagara people called Bodeme. Bodeme are members of the community who, like all other members of the community, carry specific gifts for the community, but who carry special gifts unlike other members of the community. One very important gift is that their sex, particularly their same-sex sex practices, allow the community to exist for another year. I want you to think about that for a minute. Imagine if the world depended upon your orgasm. Think about how that changes your orientation, and I use that word specifically, to your sexuality. If every time you experience sexual pleasure, if every lick and suck, every taste of flesh, every caress and kiss, every act of exchanging the erotic allowed this world to continue. The power of choice. Choosing to be a creator, sustainer of community and worlds. How would your life be different? How would your experiences be different? How would you frame who and what you are in the communities in which you live, in your families? LGBT identity politics, for the most part, has been cast within a very, very narrow frame of reality. It is quite Western, it is quite middle class, it is quite capitalist. And yes, bisexuals have experienced considerable marginalization, discrimination, monosexism, and biphobia in LGBT spaces. But what if we decided to not participate in that politics? What if for us, we conceived of who and what we are and what our roles are in this world different outside of the LGBT identity politics framework? What if our quest was something else? Beyond identity politics, beyond equality, what if our role was to bring a particular consciousness to the world? Wade in the water. There is power in the principle of fluidity. It is something that the world needs and cannot do without. The ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The ability to respond to what's in front of you authentically, rather than your preconceived notions of what that thing, what that person should, what that condition should be. Wade in the water. What if our task was to bathe the world in fluidity? The LGBT movement bristles under the idea, the accusation, that they are trying to convert others. What if we embraced it? What if we chose that as our mission moving forward? To do that, we would have to, again, deal with this idea that, yes, there's a part of sexuality that is a choice. That people choose to cut themselves off from certain kinds of pleasures. People choose to cut themselves off from certain kinds of experiences. Ever been with a lover and they push away from the pleasure? I'm not talking about an involuntary sexual experience. I'm talking about a voluntary, where they are fully committed, they are involved in that experience with you, and yet they push away from the pleasure, from the experience of disintegration. That feeling of, ooh, if I allow myself to go too far, I don't know if I will find my way back. As if where you are is where you have to stay anyway. And as if once you get to where you can go, you want to go back in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
To do the work of moving beyond LGBT identity politics, we will have to wrestle with the internalization we have around our own inferiority and marginality. We will have to reconnect with our power. We will have to shake off all of those lessons that have told us to shrink ourselves. So that we can fully access the gifts that we have to bring to communities. across the globe. My work in this started back in the mid-1990s, where I began to understand the role of embodiment in helping people to tap into their own understanding of truth. What I found through this work is that people will say a whole lot of stuff out of their mouths because we have learned how to rationalize, we've learned how to organize and frame things to fit a particular paradigm that we want to hold on to. But if you get people to move their bodies tell on them. If you get people to tell their stories and to express themselves through their bodies, the bodies speak the truth that the mind won't allow to come through the lips. So how do we make use of the power of the body in our ability to bring the power and intelligence of fluidity to people who've pushed it aside? All of us were born in fluid. We understand at a deep level, at a bone sense level, the power of fluidity. All of us were born, all of us were conceived and gestating in a place where the concepts of gender don't apply. That knowledge is still, as the Dagger said, in the bones. So how can we show up in people's lives to bring them back to that knowing? How can we be subversives and infiltrators? Way in the water, the world, in many senses, already eroticizes us, casts us as hypersexual, characterizes us as fence sitters. How can we use and manipulate and transform those mischaracterizations to call people into the water? See, I'm talking about a different politics, sexual politics here. I'm talking about a politics that is not just about what is legislated, not just about what is rationalized and intellectualized. I'm talking about a politics that gets down. Way in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the waters. This work is by no means easy, because we live in a world that has been structured to poison the water. Anyone in here from Flint? We live in a world that packages water in plastic bottles. We live in a world that is trying to privatize every natural resource. So as my mentor who recently transitioned, Ibrahim Abdul Rahman Farajadeh, would say, in order for us to do this work, we have to decolonize our bodies. We have to decolonize our minds. We have to decolonize our desires. We have to do the work of unlearning the messages that we received over and over again in subtle ways and in big ways that have taken us out of and away from our power. And that's difficult work. It means that we can't focus on blaming someone else out there. It means that we do more than talk about how HRC fucked up again. It means standing in our power.
Yeah. Yes.
And recognizing that we have power.
Yeah. Lots of power.
Remember, the water that seeks its own level the water that can inundate cities, the water that can quench thirst, the water that can baptize, the water that can drown, the water that can cleanse. My colleague Robin Oates talks about beyond binaries. I'm suggesting that we talk about beyond identities. Beyond the identity politics that narrows the definition of who we are in the world, just based upon who we may wake up next to one morning. That roots so much significance in genitalia, that organizes politics and power and resources based upon assumptions of desire. Those politics will not save this planet. And those politics will not allow us to address environmental justice and climate change. Those politics will not allow us to address imperialism. Those politics will not allow us to address the theft of resources and capitalism run amok. Those politics will not allow us to address white supremacy and the attack on black, brown bodies.
Amen.
Those politics will not allow us to address fully the ability for someone to be embodied and undefinable. So I call us to think about a new politics. I call us to remember the power of fluidity in all of its meanings. I call us to bring to bear our critical consciousness and our bone memory. And I call us to reconnect with the power of orgasm.
Yeah.
Audre Lorde spoke and wrote about the uses of the erotic as power. I hold out to us that we have the opportunity to be infiltrators and subversives, revolutionaries, using the erotic as power to transform the consciousness of the planet. James Baldwin, who is and was a sexually fluid person, regardless of what they tell you, wrote a book called The Fire Next Time. How can we be the fire that stokes the consciousness of the planet back to a recognition of complexity, a recognition of the power of complexity? And how can we be the water that heals, the water that bathes, the water that troubles the status quo? Thank you very much. We have the opportunity to be in conversation, so I'm going to open up the floor for comments, questions, and let's see what happens.
I'm happy to start off. My name is Matthew. Thank you for speaking today. I really liked how you talked about the inner and the outer. And you just wanted to express that more about not need in this world of transparency and globalization, and you need to like be open and transparent about everything. Actually having things that are intimate and your own, and not needing to expand upon it with the world.
Sure. Yeah, I am publicly a number of things. I'm publicly bisexual, I'm publicly a freak, I'm publicly a sex worker, I'm publicly a lot of different things because of my profession my job. But the average person, I don't feel is responsible to being publicly, quote unquote, bisexual or sexually fluid. If sexual politics is about freedom and choice and liberation, then for a person to choose to have those conversations with the people who are most intimate in their life, who are in their personal sphere, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I don't have a problem with that. I oftentimes say that when I'm not being a public person, I'm a private person, you don't get to know who I have sex with unless you're wanting to be one of those people. And then what you need to be concerned about is whether I will have sex with you. That's one thing. The other thing is that in terms of worldviews, people in the West have this idea that if they have the information, like that's a good in and of itself. Like, we just need information. We have a whole lot of information. We've had more access to information than any era in the history of the world. And yet, we have more stupid people. Because there's a difference between information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And if you have not cultivated, again, coming from the traditions I talked about in terms of societies of secrets, if you have not cultivated the skills to be able to grapple with certain kinds of information, then you shouldn't have access to it. Because dangerous things can happen. I used to have a friend who used to call it feeding steak to babies. You don't feed steak to babies. It is just not a good thing. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yes, back there.
Looking at the picture of the Panthers in back of you, do you remember your parents talking about any of the sex role differences in the Panthers? And I remember that famous quote, "What is the position of women in the Black Panther Party?" And the answer was grown. Did that evolve, and did that evolve to include gay people and queer people? I don't really know what happened there.
Much of that history I know outside of what my mother shared with me, and I live with my mom, not with my dad. So what I know are several things. One, that Huey P. Newton, one of the founders, one of the co-founders of the Panthers, drafted a document which spoke about how the Revolutionary Party should approach and deal with and handle revolutionaries who were fighting for sexual justice, sexual rights, what's called gay liberation at the time. Sorry, it's my timer. I also know that there were multiple women who held leadership positions in the Panthers that we look at recognizably as power positions. But my mother, like a number of women in the party, created programs like the free breakfast program, the free health clinics. My mother's a nurse, all right? Joanne Chesimard, who most people know as Assata Shakur, was involved in that work as well. So part of the challenge is making sure that one isn't bringing the assumptions, the values, the value systems from one's own cultural context into another cultural context to try to understand and tease out what's going on. what my mother shared with me was about how she survived the attacks of state power on her. That I grew up, and this is part of, I think part of my approach to life when people say, well, you know, how are you able to do that? I grew up believing and knowing that the United States government, which was the most powerful thing that I could conceive of, and again, I'm a kid, was directly opposed to my life and my living. So after that, there's not too much else that you're gonna be afraid of, as it, you know, like, so when I say things to people, when I do things, people are like, well, how are you? It's because I grew up with the idea that this big thing, United States government, wanted to end people who I loved and cared about, and could do so. And so I learned to practice both courage and fearlessness, which are very different. I've learned to practice fearlessness, which is about, hey, you're going to do what you're going to do, so why bother? The idea of revolutionary suicide that was up there. If you're going to kill me anyway, I might as well die a good death. And so committing myself to the struggle. And then courage, which is acting in the face of my fear. I'm afraid all the time of different things. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. So that's what I learned from my mom and her experience of the Panthers and how that affected my life.
I was wondering how you find the middle ground between the generations and how a lot of the younger generation they don't want our labels. They don't want, they want everything to be so much a different way, and the other generations are, no, who are you? What are you? What do you think you are? And there's such disparity.
It's almost funny to think about folks who were struggling and sacrificed so much to create the freedom that some other folks then actually are practicing, and then those folks are pissed off because why are you acting so damn free? It's like, well, what was this for? This was for me to act free. So now that I'm acting free, don't be angry, rejoice. And beyond just rejoicing, be free yourself. Unfortunately, in non-indigenous culture tradition in the West, there aren't ways to honor warriors and welcome warriors home. So when you are engaged in battle, that calls forth a particular spirit that has to be addressed when you come home. That spirit is not to exist back at home. And there's a process, ritual processes in place to thank and show honor and appreciation for that spirit and allow it to be at rest. And oftentimes I think in these quote-unquote intergenerational battles, what also is happening is that elder warriors have not been welcomed home in ways that allow them to put that spirit to rest. And so then it shows up in fighting this next generation. because a warrior spirit has to continue to be fed. And the bloodlust that drives that spirit will then show up in all of the relations.
But the battle is not over. There's still a lot of battle to be fought.
And again, about eldership. So there's a certain point at which one transitions. You were a warrior. You transition into being an elder. And the role of an elder in a war is very different than the role of a warrior. The role of the elder is to create the space, the nurturing space, that wading in the water, to create that nurturing space for the community to sustain itself, to grow, and for the warriors to come back and have that welcoming home. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
How are you subversive in your everyday life?
I label revolution in words that don't appear as revolution, so that people can taste it and take it with them. So I make things palatable. So for example, the reason why I got a doctorate, not because I actually value Western education. I got a doctorate so that I could, it's a coat that I put on. I also studied Japanese culture. So Japanese culture, they will put on Western dress in certain contexts. They go back home and put on their own shit. So the PhD was something for me to put on so that I could talk about revolution in spaces that I need to talk about it and be seen differently. So I'm always shape-shifting. I'm always masking. See that, again, that coming out thing. When you're engaged in guerrilla warfare, coming out is actually dangerous. You don't come out because you're trying to subvert. So that's broadly how I do it. And the very specifics, I'm not going to give you that because we're filming and I don't want people to know. We have a tradition in many, they have a concept in many African traditions called the trickster. And the trickster is also the opener of the way. So the trickster dons whatever they need to don, to put on, to create the context, to shift the paradigm, to shift the ego, to trick the person into experiencing the depth of reality. So thinking about how we do that. I'm always thinking about how to do that, how to do it here, how to do it there. Whether I am a researcher, a college professor, what have you, all of that is just clothes I'm a revolutionary. That's what I do. All this other stuff is just a means to practice revolution.
I've noticed that elders don't always share their stories so the younger ones can understand the battle and the struggles that they have. So how can they expect the young ones to understand where they're coming from?
I think a part of that is, again, the lack of eldership in modern Western cultures and societies. People become senior citizens, but they don't necessarily become elders. And an elder knows where they are in their story because the community has created a context for that. So without the community creating a context and a container, eldership and how you move into eldership and what's the ceremony, what's the ritual to move you into eldership. Without that, not knowing that you are in that place, then you don't actually know that you have a role to play. I experienced that personally very recently, working with an organization, sexually fluid organization, and the founder of it wanted me to be an elder. But we weren't using that language, and so I didn't know that that's what they wanted me to do, and so I wasn't doing it. And so things would happen, and they were getting pissed off with me, and I was getting frustrated because we hadn't said, okay, you are an elder here. Oh, okay. Now I have a framework to understand what my role is and how we're going to interact. Yes?
When you say that we should challenge the notion that sexuality is a choice, which is something I don't know, what do you mean by that? What would be the context, the framework?
I'm saying that we challenge the notion, we challenge one of the assertions of the mainstream LGBT movement, which is sexuality is not a choice. And that we say that yes, it is, and we're helping people to choose every day. And so how we do that is one, not believing in sexual identity as a thing.
Sexuality wasn't a choice. Why would we need so much societal pressure for people to be one way? It would be absolutely unneeded. It wouldn't be present.
So if we stop believing in it as a real thing, other than somebody just saying it, okay, yeah, you say it, but is it as real as that? And then if we get actually on the subatomic level, we realize that actually this is a construction. The belief that this is solid, and not recognizing that actually if we get at the subatomic level, there's spaces in between. There's so much space in between.
How about a paradox?
Huh?
Both, right?
So that if we don't look at it, if we don't digest it as this thing, that then means all these other things. Someone says that they're gay, or someone says that they're straight. And we then believe that means a whole bunch of stuff. Suppose we say, okay, it's just like saying their name. But that doesn't tell us anything else about their capacities, their experiences, their interests, their desires. And we engage them where they're at. I'll give you an example where I didn't do this. So I was hired at Goddard, and the program director at the time was a white lesbian woman. In my orientation, told me that that the college has policies around faculty, which include faculty cannot have sex or sexual relationships with students. Faculty cannot. The college discourages faculty from bringing their loved ones to campus. We're a low residency college, so we're only on campus for like 8 days. The college discourages faculty from bringing in partners, loved ones on campus because they want us to focus on working with students. And faculty also are not permitted to have relations with each other. So I was like, okay, I don't care. Well, whatever. So a couple years later, I'm sitting in faculty lounge with faculty members who were hired before me and faculty members who were hired after me. And somehow in the conversation, I bring this up. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I said, what? They said, well, okay, yeah, the college is clear, you can't have sexual relationships with students, but that other stuff, we've never heard that before. What? Yeah, we never heard, that's not, no, I got angry and pissed off, and I could say, okay, well, it's because I'm bisexual, and I'm a black bisexual man, and da-da-da-da, and so hyper-sexualizing me, da-da-da. And then I went to the water, and I sat in the water, and listened to the wisdom of the water, and realized that she wanted to fuck me. What happened was that I, in my embodiment, no, I shouldn't say it that way. I'll say that she responded to the energy that I carry and felt the erotic within her. And the way she then chose to deal with that was to tell me this stuff that wasn't consistent with the policy and hadn't been told to anybody else. But because I was stuck on, well, she identifies as lesbian, I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing, what my energy was doing to her, and how she was responding to my energy on that level. So it's about not investing in the construct of sexual identity.
But isn't the concept of, oh, she wanted to fuck me within the framework of like major patriarchy? Yeah.
Say more.
Assuming
Mm-hmm.
that like you then made the assumption, oh, she wanted to fuck you. I think that's totally inappropriate. And also, yeah, I appreciated a lot of the things that you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
but to then say the reason why she told me all of these things was because actually she wanted to have sex with me.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say that.
He did.
No, let's not argue. Let's let the person finish.
He that's what I heard
Mm-hmm.
you say. But so I'm having a difficult time with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just think that's incredibly inappropriate.
Cool. So from my come from place, if I wanted to fuck her and then told myself, well, she wants to fuck me, which then justifies my desires, that would be patriarchal. I had no interest in this person.
It's not the interest that matters. It's the framework. It's a thought process of like the end point. Like if it all comes down to, oh, she must want me, I see that as patriarchy.
Yeah.
Mansplaining or like.
I see what you mean, and I disagree. And that I think a part of the a part of the challenge to certain, not all, certain feminist discourses is the lack of funkiness, which is rooted in whiteness. So there is a knowing in the body. That knowing does not necessarily have to be hierarchical or patriarchal. The limitations of white feminist discourse is in the lack of rootedness in the funky and in the embodied, which keeps our principles all up in our head and not in the actual exchanges, in the actual living, in the actual movement between people in space.
Did she
I
tell
identify,
you- Did she tell you, or did she
Okay.
indicate she wanted to
No.
fuck you?
no,
Then you can't make
No.
that assumption.
I can, based upon my cultural paradigm.
And my,
Because again, I'm coming from a cultural paradigm where I can be in spirit and speak to spirit, and spirit speak to me and give me access to knowledge that isn't just about the coming out information. But again, we're coming from different cultural worldviews.
Hey, Dr. H, we can't take any more questions. We
Cool.
gotta wrap up, but.
Sorry, there's not a clock back there, so I couldn't tell.
Sorry, I was trying to wave at you, but you
Okay.
thought I was waving at
Cool, thank you, thank you.
Can you stay here and talk to folks that want to talk to you?
Yes, definitely.
Great. So we've got to wrap up and then move back to the workshop and start in 15 minutes.
Cool, thank you. Thank you all.